Thank you. Be seated. It's before I get going, I want to make sure I mention that it's a rare treat for us today to have our senior pastor, Jay Frace, with us. Jay, would you stand? And so there's some of you that may not know Jay, and I appreciate you honoring him. Thank you for that. And occasionally Jay and I will switch pulpits, and occasionally, by a certain amount of divine providence, I'm allowed to go to big church. And I have to behave when I'm there. So we'll do that sometime pretty soon, and you'll get to hear him preach. But glad that he could be here today. Our scripture today is from Psalm 16, as we consider the Advent theme of joy. Lord, you alone are my cup. Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night, my heart instructs me. I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad, and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room that would say that something that we don't have enough of sometimes in this world is joy. I like to be around people who are just ridiculously joyful, that when you're around them long enough, you wonder what kind of drugs they're taking, right? It's that kind of joyful person. I know some people like that, and we need more joy. And I think when we think of being joyful, one of the places our mind might automatically go is where mine went early in the week when I was preparing for this. And that is that there are things in life that give us more joy, that increase our capacity for joy. And then on the other hand, there are things that can destroy our joy, that can diminish it, make it hard to be joyful, that can kill our joy, hence the phrase, kill joy. So we have both, right? We live with that sort of ambivalence in life, and we have to navigate that. But we, above all people, have reason to be joyful once we come to know the Lord and he begins to work in our lives. So it's kind of a mandate, I think, in some ways for us that we need to be people who carry joy with us. And maybe people would ask us, like, that crazy question, like, how can you be so happy today? How can you be so joyful? After all, it's Monday. And it's raining or whatever, but we're like those kind of people. So here are some things that came to my mind. When I think about those things that can rob our joy, maybe you can think right now, if you started making a list, the top 3 things that tend to kill your joy, that tend to take joy away from you, what would they be? Here are the things that came to my mind. One is holding a grudge. When something happens to you, somebody wrongs you. I mean, they really did wrong you. They slighted you. It was intentional. You have family members long enough. I'm thinking of a couple of things in my life where a family member did something that hurt and that was wrong, and it took me a little while. Forgiveness wasn't quick. And I think we all have to be honest about that. But we all know, don't we, that it's bad news for us to carry a grudge or to not forgive someone and to carry that around. It'll poison us after a while. And we begin to pay a price for that. And that can certainly sap our joy. The other thing I thought about was fatigue. One of the things that happens to us at Christmas time is we start packing our schedule with more and more holiday events and parties and shopping. And I think this season, as much as any season, we get too much in our schedule. We don't balance it very well. And we can get physically tired, emotionally tired, and even spiritually tired. And fatigue, if we let it mount up too much, can itself drain us of our joy. So that's just a word for us to remember, to find balance in life. Every once in a while, say no to something and have your schedule match the way that it ought to with your life. And then the third thing I thought of is a little bit ambiguous, but I want to mention it because I think it's important, and that is one of the things that can really rob us of our joy is when we are not letting go of something we should let go of. I want to remind you that we are pilgrims and that this earth is not our home, and that most of the things that we have in life we're supposed to hold loosely. We're not to hold on to them as if they belong to us for eternity. Relationships, possessions, jobs, all kinds of things. And I think it's something that if we start carrying with us things from one season of life to the next season of life to the next season of life that we should have somehow let go of, a few years ago in that previous season, that will rob us of our joy. And then the positive side, what gives you joy? We all have our list. I hope you can make a list of top 3 things. Number 1 for me are relationships. I have friends that I can call that as soon as they pick up the phone, I hear their voice, I feel better, and I'm joyful just because I'm talking to them. I have family members who bring me great joy. Last night I got to watch my son Caleb put on a show out at Los Tres. And I remember when he was young, when I started realizing that he didn't just like music, he wasn't just interested in music, he loves music. He loves music like nobody I've ever seen before. He dissects it. It's always all kinds. Every time I talk to him, I can say, "Who are you listening to now?" And he'll tell me somebody I've never heard of, and I go, He's helped my musical library to expand. So it was very joyful to be him, and both my sons were there. And Josh was recording his brother playing because Josh is a filmmaker, and so that's pretty cool, right? So I stayed out late, so if I fall asleep in the middle of the sermon, you'll understand. I went to bed at 1 o'clock, which is rare for this old boy. But it was joyful to be there with family and get to see him do his thing, right? All parents can understand that. How about this one? Living with a sense of purpose can fuel your joy. Too many people, way too many people, punch the clock to pay the bills so they can one day retire, and that's the extent of their purpose. Man, can I tell you, you were born for bigger things than that. And you may punch a clock, and then most of us do, right? But we ought to be punching the clock with purpose. Like I'm there. Who can I share my faith with? What can I do today to help my neighbor? What can I do with the money that I make that would expand the kingdom? I mean, we ought to have purpose. I mean, when Jeremiah says, "Lord, you knew me in the womb. I was fearfully and wonderfully made." I mean, that's no joke, right? And that ought to beat in our hearts. So we got to live with a sense of purpose. And if you haven't been thinking about your purpose lately, I encourage you to go back and pray with that. Talk to people around you. Say, "What do you see in me? What do you think my divine purpose is?" Years ago, I kind of had this statement come to me that when I was doing some ministry, and I just felt like the Lord kind of saying that my purpose was to help people come into the fullness of their purpose. So that's my purpose, is to help other people come into the fullness of their purpose. And nothing gives me greater joy than to see somebody discover it and to kind of light up, right? I love that quote from John Eldredge's book, Wild at Heart. He said, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world really needs is people who've come alive. And so people who are alive with purpose are the ones that bring joy, and they spread it. It's contagious. And so we want to be like that. And then the third thing I thought of is just this: giving to others, serving. In what area of your life right now are you serving? What area have you scheduled into your life on a regular basis that you're doing something to serve? At church, with an organization in the community, with kids, with the elderly, in whatever way that you find it, find some place to serve and to give some of your time and life away, and I think you'll find that your joy will replicate and become bigger. I discovered this quote this week. I thought this was interesting. C.S. Lewis, you gotta love C.S. Lewis. He once said this: "Joy is the serious business of heaven." Can I tell you today, God wants you to be joyful. He didn't want you to just kind of survive life and every time Monday rolls around, wish, that it was over. I mean, I have a tough time with Mondays too, but I just want to remind you that Mondays are 1/7 of your life. You don't want to waste 1/7 of your life, right? So we want to be people who are joyful. Tim Hansel, in his book, Holy Sweat, he calls joy the master skill of the believer. It's the master skill. You got to have a lot of skills, but joy is the master skill. He says it takes skill to maintain joy, to live in joy, to keep it going in your life. And he says this: if you don't have joy, you'll find it hard to really get anywhere. You'll find it hard work just to get somewhere. And if you do get there without joy, you'll find it hard to stay there. So joy needs to be just a part of who we are. Joy is fuel for the soul. Jeremiah says it's the joy of the Lord that's our strength. So if in this season of your life, if you're feeling a little weak, run down, you don't have a lot of strength, what you need to do is look at your joy meter a little bit, right? Because if you have joy, it produces strength in your life. And I found this quote. I thought this is the over-the-top quote. Think joy, talk joy, practice joy, share joy, saturate your mind with joy, and you will have the time of your life. Come on. It's time to be joyful, like ridiculously joyful. I mean, you're standing in line at Brooksers, they're wondering, what's wrong with this guy? Doesn't he know what time of day it is, or that, that the economy's bad and that we have all these political, we know all of that. We know all of that and then some, don't we, right, if you're paying attention. But in the middle of that, even when life is crazy, there's to be this joy because joy is not attached to circumstances, right? It's attached to relationship. It's attached to who we are as children of the King. So, what I want to deal with a little bit today in this passage, I want to ask you this question. What is our part in the process of becoming more joyful? I mean, how do we line up our lives so that we are cultivating joy on a regular basis? So let's explore a little bit of principles. Principle number 1, we need to maintain a true reliance on God. Now, that sounds simple, and that sounds almost just way too easy. But I didn't say a reliance on God. I said a true reliance, an authentic, deep reliance on God for all of who you are. It's the kind of thing I think that's rare. So listen to how the psalm starts. Psalm 16, verse 5. Lord, you alone, nothing else, you alone, singularly, exclusively, you alone are my portion and my cup. Right? I think it takes a while to get to that place. I think it takes a while to go through to use the theological word, sanctification, that from the time you get baptized and have faith and you come to Christ, this process of God teaching you how to depend on Him. Because think about it, we depend on all kinds of things, right? I mean, we depend on relationships, we depend on our finances, we depend on our jobs, we have dependencies. But the psalmist here is saying that there's a place in the heart of the believer that is reserved only for God. I remind you today that our God is a jealous God. There's a part of your heart that belongs only to Him, that no other person or thing or experience can touch or do anything with that part of your heart. And if you're not giving that part, that deep part of your heart to Him, it's going to be difficult to be joyful. But I think it takes a while, and I think we have to be patient with others, and I think we have to be patient with ourselves. But I think we can be encouraged that it is, and I think Tim Hansel was right, it's a skill that you learn. I think it's something you learn over time. Where am I depending on something else for my joy, my identity, for my true depth of who I am, other than God Himself? And we have to learn to do that. And I think we can train our hearts, right, to learn to know that deepest part of who we are and give it to Him and to Him only. Amen? It's a good place. I don't think it's an easy place, and I think it takes time. But it's okay, right? We just over time, like, Lord, I want to give more of myself to you. In our Christmas series this year, we've called it All I Want for Christmas. That's an exclusive statement. It's me at 9 years old. All I want for Christmas is a Red Ryder BB gun so I can shoot my eye out. That's all I want. I didn't shoot my eye out, but I had a BB gun. I wish I still had that gun, by the way. But Red Ryder BB gun, right? And when we say all I want is this one thing, that we're saying I'm excluding everything else. And that's the heart of the disciple. That's where you hear it in that verse, right? Lord, you alone are my portion. I'm not depending on, I'm not feeding spiritually on anything else. I'm just seeking after you like nothing else. Psalm 118 says this, the Lord is my strength and my defense. And hear this phrase, I love this phrase, and He has become my salvation. I don't think that means like rebirth, like when you give your heart to Jesus. It means that salvation is a bigger word than just a one-time experience, right? It's like the way God takes care of our whole life. And it's like the psalmist says, over time you have become my salvation. And we want to be in the becoming business at our church. Patient with ourselves, with others, over time, more and more, season by season, really becoming like that. I love the sequence of John chapter 6. If you hadn't read it in a while, you should go back and read it. It's an amazing sequence. So this is where Jesus feeds the 5,000 and freaks his disciples out. 5 loaves, 2 fishes, and he feeds 5,000 people with them. I mean, I don't even know that we can get our minds around what that must have been like. Like, I don't know, did the fish just suddenly appear? Did they fall from the sky? I don't know. But fish, more fish, and they're just feeding, right? And then immediately after that, Jesus says, you guys go to the other side. In the middle of the night, he comes walking on water. So feed the 5,000. Jesus is walking on water. This is pretty cool stuff. Man, I don't know if they knew what they were signing up for. I don't think when he said, drop your nets and follow me, I don't think they knew exactly what they were signing up for. But this was cool. I mean, if he's going to walk on water and feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, it's a good day. The cool part is that when they realized, not what he sent the disciples over, but the crowd figured out Jesus isn't over here anymore. So they got some boats and they followed him over to the other side. And so he gets over the other side on the heels of those 2 miracles. And he's got this big crowd, and because Jesus wants to build a big church and have an online presence where thousands of people come to his building every week, he says the thing that's simple, like, if you just give a little bit of money, you can be a member here, and it's easy. Was that what he said? He said this. Now, listen, it makes sense in the context. He just fed 5,000, and he says to them, I am the bread of life. If you're paying attention, that's really connected, right? He says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. And some of the Jewish guys had followed over with the crowd, and they did what Jewish guys did back in those days. They grumbled. They're ordering, can't believe he said that. This is heresy. They're just mumbling, right? But he wasn't through. And then he said this, very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man. Eat flesh? Wait a minute. I just wanted to follow you because you did miracles. Now you want me to, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of the Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you, Jesus says to the crowd. For my flesh is real food. In other words, all that other stuff you've been eating wasn't real stuff. At the synagogue, my flesh is real food and my blood is real drink. And then it says this. Now you got to remember, I want to remind you, it wasn't just the 12 that followed him. There were times in the Gospels where lots more people were following him around, right? So that's when this was. This big group's following him. And it says, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Many left him. Here's what I think is true. I think it broke his heart. He's still going to say the hard thing. He's going to say the true thing. But I think it broke his heart. And Jesus turns to the 12 and he says this, will you also go away? Can you hear his heart in that? Are you also going to leave me? Will you also go? Listen to what Peter says that fits into what we're talking about. A true reliance on God alone as your portion. Peter, turns to him. I think that question hung in the air, by the way, because he said, will you also go away? Do you also want to leave me? And I think it hangs in the air. And Peter being Peter, what does he say? He says, Lord, to whom shall we go? There's nowhere else to go. You have the words of life. And we have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. Where else would we go? Now, I got to figure that at least one of those boys was thinking, I don't like this deal, but I know it's right. You ever been in that situation with commitment? Like, I know I need to do this, but I'm not too comfortable with it, but I know I'm supposed to do it. And I think that's exactly what happened. And you got to love that part of what they said in there was before they left him, he said, this is a hard saying. This is difficult. This is, whoo, man, you went from 0 to 2,000. Like, you just ratcheted up the whole thing here. We thought we were going to get to watch you do more miracles, and now you're telling us if we don't eat your flesh and drink your blood, we have no life in you? This is a hard saying. Who can do it? Many left him. And Peter says, we're not leaving. We don't have anywhere else to go. It's a hard saying. So I watched Caleb last night. He's 27. When he was 3, we went to Durango, Colorado, and rode the steam engine train up to Silverton. Anybody else done that before? Some of y'all probably done that. So Durango, Colorado, it's beautiful, right? The San Juan Mountains they're very different, I think, than a lot of the other mountains in that part of the world. And so we get on the train. Now, Josh was about 1, and he didn't meet the age requirement or something, so he couldn't ride. I don't think he's traumatized now, but he was that day because he didn't remember it. He was 1 year old. But Caleb gets on the train, and I have a picture of that train, right? So if you've ridden the train, so it's a true steam engine train, right? That's coal back in the back, or they have a coal car that comes around beside it or something. But then you hang out the windows and you ride, and it's unbelievable. That's where Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, right? Robert Redford and Paul Newman, where they jump off. That's where it happened. They tell you where they jumped and all this stuff. But when they had the time, we got on the train, it's time. I used to wear a watch back in the day, back in the dark ages. So I had a watch on, and I was like, well, the time came, and we didn't move. And then they cranked it up and tried to move, and it wouldn't move. And then I'm like, it went on like an hour. I was like, well, I guess we're just going to sit here. And we were asking what the problem was. It's a train full of tourists. And they said, well, the problem is that the last batch of coal was from the bottom of the train car, and it was soft. It was kind of the residue stuff. It wasn't the hard coal that burns a lot hotter. And so when they loaded that in there and they tried to run it, that coal would not burn hot enough to power the engine. Let me tell you something about hard stuff. Hard stuff. Hard stuff, if you can accommodate it, if you can say, okay, I don't like this idea that I got to drink his blood and eat his, I don't know about that. That's hard. But I trust him. So if he says do it, I'll do it, even if I don't understand it. It's hard, but that hard stuff burns hotter than the soft stuff. Listen, one of the things I think we do wrong in church is we make it too easy. We're just like, yeah, if you just come to church and sign a card, everything's great. How about give your life away? How about surrender your heart completely to the only one that can save you? How about discipleship at its toughest height? What are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to die to follow him? I don't hear any amens. Listen, it's where I live too. It's like, sometimes it's too easy. It's like this, modern day, sugar cookie Christianity. Number 2 helps us with this. Joy comes to those who operate within healthy boundaries. I think this phrase ought to echo in our spirits a little bit. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. My lines, my boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. I think it should echo. What does that mean? I used to view commandments as restrictions. All of them. Thou shalt not kill. That's a good idea. Not just for Christians, for everybody, right? Let's don't go around killing people. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not have any graven image, right? All the commandments, right? And if you look at them, you could kind of go, well, man, God's legalistic. He's got all these rules, and I got to do this and do that, and I can't, all these lists of things I can't do, right? You know how I view it now? As an invitation. He's inviting us into a life. He's inviting us into a kingdom life. And he says, in the kingdom, you don't commit adultery. In the kingdom, you don't steal. In the kingdom, you love your enemies. That's a fun one, right? In the kingdom, before you come take communion, if you haven't forgiven someone, like we talked about earlier, you got to do that before you come to take communion. Because in the kingdom, we don't get to harbor petty grievances against people. Because it's a tough deal. So, My dad passed away in 2017, first year I was here. My mom passed away in April. They both lived long, long, rich lives. They were married over 65 years. I honor my parents. And one of the things that happened is my dad, after he retired as soon as I graduated from Howard Payne. He's like, okay, I got the last one out the door, I'm done. And then he started buying up little rent properties. He always had like a little rent house to piddle with. So none of this is like big money stuff, right? So when my mom passed away, there are 5 kids in the family. Each of us got a property in the family. But one of the properties, there was a problem with the house. We had to tear it down and remove it. It was an old little rent house. And so my oldest brother and I, we talked about it, and I said, look, it's not fair. I told him, it's not fair for me to get this other one, and you just all you have is a lot. And so we all worked it out. And so my brother Jason and I shared 2 properties. Everybody else got the one. Jason and I shared the 2 to make it more equitable. And so the first thing we've sold, we're working on selling the second one, but the first thing we sold was just a lot. Now this lot, and there were 3 lots. The house my dad was born in 1930, he was born in the living room. And then a lot, empty lot, and then a house that my uncle built at the end that my dad later bought. Okay, so there were 3 lots. Been in the family since 1917. So it's some heritage, right? But there's this lot in the middle. Nobody wants to do, everybody in the family like, y'all want to do? No, I don't want to do anything with it. So Jason and I sold this lot. Well, the survey was kind of old. We got some real estate people in the house. Don would understand this. So we had to redo the survey. And so we get an offer for exactly what the lot, the guy said he'll just pay full price, he wants the lot. So we checked the survey, and my brother told me that if you can imagine, the lot's like my house my dad was born in over here, my house my niece now lives in over here, lot in the middle, and my niece's driveway is like right here. And when my brother, the way he told me, he said, well, we got to redo the survey, and we're probably going to have to reduce the price. Because he said, right now when our niece Jill drives up in her driveway and gets out of her car, she's now on the other guy's property because the lot was drawn wrong. There was something wrong with the survey. So in essence, we cut out like a wide sidewalk and ran it the length of the property and redrew the property lines and took $2,000 off the price or something like that. Listen, we got to quit viewing thou shalt not, or there are some rules, or hey, there's some behaviors, you really need to do this. This is how believers live. We got to quit viewing them as restrictions, because when you do, your problem is when you step out of your car, you're in your neighbor's property, right? You're out of bounds, and you can't do that. You can't keep living like there are no lines. Let me tell you, the person that lives in the biggest prison in the world is the person that thinks they can do anything they want to at any time to anybody for any reason. They're totally free. Nobody can tell them anything. And how many of you know that's a dangerous place to live? And the Lord wants to secure us. And so part of what this thing is that, my boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. In other words, I don't see rules and regulations in what the Lord has said here in the things that he did leading up to this verse, because what he's trying to draw is sort of a strategy for joy being greater in your life. And so it's the kid that finally goes, okay, my curfew on Friday night is midnight. My friends get to come home at 2 a.m. I hate my mom and dad. This is a stupid. At some point, the kid goes, it's probably from our protection, because there's really not a whole lot of good going on at Brownwood at 1:30 in the morning anyway. I know, because I was out till 1 last night. I was looking for some of you. Your spouse says, we need to tighten our buckle on our belt. So we're going to draw a boundary line. Here's the boundary line. Neither one of us can spend over $100 on any item without checking with the other one first. For some of you, you'd be like, oh, that really cramps my style. No, it doesn't. It sets you free. The boundary line has fallen for me in pleasant places. It'll probably save you some money and help you get there. How many of you have trouble following the speed limit? Let's see the hands. How many of you can't stand it when somebody passes you on the highway? See? Isn't it a good idea that the speed limit now on Coggin Avenue is not 75 like it is on 377 to Brady? I think it's a good thing, because every once in a while I see somebody going that fast almost. I saw a guy on a motorcycle